Vice President Kamala Harris has been caught, exposed, plagiarizing major portions of her book, Smart on Crime. You've probably never heard of this book. Maybe you have. Smart on Crime is a significant piece of Kamala Harris's political career. I don't want to say it's the beginning of her political career because we all know that the beginning of Kamala Harris's political career was Willie Brown. But Smart on Crime was Kamala's book that she published before she ran for Attorney General in the state of California. It was her introduction as someone who was supposed to be tough on crime. Without this book, Kamala Harris might never have become the Attorney General of California. And yet, according to reporting by Chris Rufo, at least 10 major portions of Kamala Harris's book were plagiarized. She lifted them. She copied them. This is unethical in the extreme. The plagiarism was caught by a man named Stefan Weber. He's from Austria. He calls himself the plagiarism hunter because this is kind of what he does. He goes through the works of major political figures looking for plagiarism, and he's done this successfully. He's taken down several politicians in the German-speaking world. Well, now he set his sight on Kamala Harris, and in her book, she plagiarized the Associated Press, NBC News, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, a press release, no less. How embarrassing is that? Not even like data, but a press release. The Bureau of Justice Assistance report, an Urban Institute report, and get this, Kamala Harris even lifted a huge piece from Wikipedia. Now, if this smacks of the Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard plagiarism scandal, remember when she lifted all those different pieces and plagiarized them, put them in her doctoral thesis, only to face basically no accountability from the left because they were like, she's a black woman. She can do whatever she wants. There are no moral standards that we apply to token hires. And then, of course, it got to the point that conservatives righteously put pressure on her until she was forced to resign. If this smacks of that situation, that's good. Because what Kamala Harris has done by plagiarizing so many different things, almost a dozen times in her book, this is almost as significant as when Joe Biden in 1988 plagiarized so much of other people's work that he was forced to drop out of the Democrat presidential race in that year. 1 year, by the way, before I was born. If Kamala Harris is not held to the same standard that Joe Biden was held to when he was exposed as a serial plagiarizer, then my friends, that's on us. Because we have been given the gift of this information. We've been given the opportunity to expose Kamala Harris as a dishonest, unethical hack. And if we don't take that opportunity and Kamala Harris wins, then you could say, it's potentially our fault because it's all right here in front of us. Wikipedia she plagiarized, for goodness sake. Meanwhile, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is out with a new threat and definition of disinformation. He is accusing you and I of spreading disinformation if we dare to criticize the Democrats' strategy on illegal immigration. Take a look at this.
65% of Trump voters believe the Biden administration is trying to intentionally increase the number of migrants at the border. And among the people who do believe that, 3/4 of them say it's because the administration wants them to vote. And the Speaker of the House just told us that he thinks non-citizens are going to vote, even though this is already illegal under established law.
Like,
what
nobody's ever committed a crime
can you
before.
tell the public about that exist to prevent this from happening?
So what a powerful example of disinformation. There is no facts underlying these assertions. They are extremely damaging.
So first of all, I want to thank Secretary Mayorkas for taking time away from shopping for high-end menswear during the hurricane to come on to a specifically biased mainstream media outlet and call us names. We're glad that you were able to step away from being an elitist hypocrite and address us by insulting our intelligence. Okay, the reason I brought this clip up, though, is because he's wrong, of course, and we'll get to why he's wrong in a minute. But this is how the left defines disinformation. It's a word that they made up because it sounds like it means false information. But actually what the left means by disinformation is not false information. What they mean by disinformation is any criticism of any government entity or any dissent from any leftist ideology. That's the definition of disinformation. And Mayorkas proved that to us because what he is talking about isn't false information. Of course, the Democrats invited this illegal immigration crisis. The open borders policies that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have implemented is an implicit invitation for migrants to cross our border. Why wouldn't you cross if you are promised to be released into the United States with no penalty, no deportation? All you have to do is bring a kid with you. Doesn't matter if this kid is part of a recycling ring, a reused child that is used to gain entry to the United States. Court dates aren't enforced. You are allowed to cross with any kind of false asylum claim. You don't have to remain in Mexico until your asylum claim is processed. All of these policies implicitly invite illegal immigration, implicitly invite migrants to cross our border en masse, just like we are seeing. And even if you want to go a step further and say, well, Liz, implicit invitation, I don't know if that's enough for me. How about an explicit invitation from Joe Biden himself on the campaign trail in 2020 saying, oh, in a heartbeat, we could absorb 2 million more migrants. That's totally fine. That in a country of 300 million people, 2 million additional migrants, no big deal. He literally said that as migrant caravans were heading towards our border. If that isn't an explicit invitation for these people to come, then I don't know what is. But again, we're talking about Mayorkas here. Mayorkas is the one who lied about Border Patrol agents on horses. He said they were whipping migrants when they were swinging their lassos. Well, no, they weren't. And an investigation found that they weren't. And anybody who knows anything about horses or even spent like 1 minute researching it knows that no, when a person approaches a horse that's not trained for people to approach it, the rider often uses the lasso swinging in that way to move people away or to turn the horse. It's a signal for the horse to turn the other direction. It's how you guide the horse, how you drive the horse, if you will. But Mayorkas was the one who propagated the lie that Border Patrol were whipping migrants from their horses. So again, it's very important to note that when the left says disinformation, they're not talking about false information. They're not talking about something that's untrue. They are talking about our opinions, which contradict their opinions. And they don't want to engage us on the actual substance of what's happening, because if they engaged us on the substance of what's happening, then the American people would see that they're frauds. For example, we know for a fact that it is part of the left's agenda to have an open border. They have said this from the George Soros Open Societies Foundation to Kamala Harris saying that she's going to decriminalize illegal border crossings. We know they want the border open. That's established. It's inarguable. We also know that one of the reasons that they want the open borders, that they want mass migration, and one of the reasons that they extend this quote unquote legal status to so many migrants like the Haitians in Ohio, for example, with this temporary protected status, is because they want to naturalize these migrants. They want them to become citizens so that they can have the right to vote, so that they can be coerced into voting Democrat. We know this. It's not conjecture. It's not us saying, well, I wonder if that's what they're going to do. No, we know this. There is a group that is funded by George Soros. It's called the National Partnership for New Americans. Its goal, this is what it calls itself, a national, multi-ethnic, multiracial partnership network of 60 of the country's leading immigrant and refugee rights organizations. It received over $500,000 from George Soros. And guess what they brag about on their website? They say our network has supported the naturalization of over 250,000 U.S. citizens and has been a key driver of advocacy to make naturalization more affordable and accessible. And then on their website, they say that their goal is to naturalize 2 million by 2022, along with the phrase, new American voters. So yeah, Secretary Mayorkas, it's real. We know the open borders agenda of the left is intentional. They have both explicitly and implicitly invited mass migration. And we know that the purpose of it, sure, it's to violate our sovereignty. Sure, it's to overwhelm our welfare system. But the most important, critical goal to the left in ushering in this crisis of illegal aliens is to naturalize them, to make them citizens so that they vote for Democrats. And we have the proof to back that up. When you use the word disinformation, it's a red flag to us to know that you don't want us to know the truth. Joe Biden also is using the phrase disinformation. And this is where this is COVID all over again. We talked about this last week. The way that the Joe Biden administration and his executive agencies and the media, the left as a whole, the way that they are still talking about the hurricane and the FEMA scandal behind Hurricane Helene, or in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, it reminds me of what they did in COVID, the safe and effective, and you will be shut down and censored if you criticize the government or big pharma. The Biden administration is deploying this tactic again. Still, Joe Biden himself is getting in on it. Take a look at what he said you are engaging in if you criticize the government on hurricane disaster relief.
I think those who have been spreading these lies to try to undermine the opposition are going to pay a price for it.
Oh, we're going to pay a price for it. Okay, so that's the critical second part of this. The number one question that these people hate, by the way, the left hates, is they hate the question why. They hate the question why. Whenever they accuse us of propagating a conspiracy theory, it's just criticism of the government. They can never actually give us an example of a conspiracy theory. They never detail it. They never substantiate their point. They just throw this word out there as if the word is substantiation itself. They say, oh, these people that are throwing out disinformation and conspiracy theories, it's criticism of the government. They can never give an example. And the number one question that they hate, the reason why they use phrases like conspiracy theories and disinformation, is they hate the question, why? Why is it a conspiracy theory? Why? What makes me identifying that FEMA gave $1 billion to illegal alien welcome centers and then didn't have money for victims of Hurricane Helene? What makes that a conspiracy theory? Well, they don't want to answer that question, so they throw out the phrase disinformation. They also, they apply this, by the way, to their policies as well. They never want to answer the question, why is your policy beneficial to me? Why is your policy beneficial to my community? Why is your policy beneficial to our country as a whole? Why are you doing this? They never want to answer that question, and so they just throw out disinformation, conspiracy theories, and then if we do not desist, they say, as you heard Joe Biden say, there will be a penalty. And that, my friends, is the crux of this whole effort against us. There will be a penalty if you criticize the left. They will censor you, they will silence you, they will demonize you, and ultimately they will try to put you in jail. But the first thing that you will hear is you're spreading disinformation. Speaking of disinformation, J.D. Vance was talking to Martha Raddatz over the weekend about the immigration crisis, and Martha Raddatz actually had the audacity to defend Venezuelan gangs, which had hijacked apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado. She defended that. She hates Trump so much she defended that. Take a listen to this.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
First of all, J.D. Vance absolutely killed that. Do you hear yourself, Martha? I wish the entirety of ABC News, they should be embarrassed. You're defending that it's only happened a handful of times that violent foreign gangs hijacked people's homes. It's only a handful of homes. A handful of people were taken hostage by violent Venezuelan gangs. Good Lord. This is what that should be the campaign ad that runs across the airwaves for the rest of the election cycle. That's Kamala Harris. Welcome to Kamala Harris's America. And the mainstream media defends that simply because they don't like Donald Trump. And they're so elitists that they are insulated from the ramifications of this illegal alien crisis. By the way, even Bill Clinton this week, Bill Clinton said that if these illegal aliens were properly vetted before they were allowed entry to the United States, then violent murders like the murder of Laken Riley, the Georgia student, you remember her, she went running, she was violently raped and murdered by an illegal alien who was not supposed to be here because he was a criminal and had been deported. Even Bill Clinton said if illegal aliens like that disgusting man had been vetted properly, this crime wouldn't happen. Take a listen.
You had a case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about it, about a young woman who'd been killed by an immigrant. Yeah, well, if they'd all been properly vetted, that probably wouldn't have happened. But if they're all properly vetted, and that doesn't happen, and America is not having enough babies to keep our populations up, so we need immigrants that have been vetted to do work, there wouldn't be a problem. And he couldn't keep people all torn up and upset.
So what argument is Bill Clinton trying to make here? Is he making an argument that Kamala Harris is dangerous to our nation? Because that's what it sounded like in the first breath. Or is he making an argument that the Democrat Party should stop advocating for the brutal murder of unborn children via abortion and that we would not then have a population crisis? Because it sounds to me like Bill Clinton has become conservative. That would actually be the funniest red pill of all time. I don't think I would laugh as hard at anything in my entire life as if Bill Clinton was like, actually, after all this time, I've decided to become conservative because things I've done and Hillary's done have destroyed the nation. Sounded like a conservative to me. Let me ask you a question. Do you think our country is going in the right direction, or does it feel to you like everything's falling apart? If you're feeling alarmed, well, don't worry, you're not alone. In fact, Americans from all walks of life have taken action to prepare for whatever's coming next. And I don't just mean whatever's coming next in like the next 3 weeks before the election. I mean what's coming next in 2025. This preparation starts with having an emergency food supply. Storing food in your home, it's the right thing to do because we are living in crazy times, which explains why so many people are preparing. Heck, even my husband and I, when Kamala Harris started talking about imposing price controls on the food industry if she becomes president, I turned to my husband and I was like, we have emergency food, right? Because she's going to cause a run on grocery stores. And my husband was like, yeah, we have 2 pallets of My Patriot Supply in the basement. Right now, you too can get ready with a 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. It comes with delicious foods. I'm talking like creamy stroganoff, honey wheat bread, mushroom rice. The entire kit offers over 2,000 calories every day. And this food kit lasts up to 25 years. So who knows what our country will look like then. Hopefully you won't have to use this next year, but you will be ready whenever that day comes. Go to preparewithliz.com right now to order your 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. Go to preparewithliz.com. That's preparewithliz.com. So there was a report that there was a 3rd assassination attempt against Donald Trump. And I say report because this is a very confusing story. I'm not exactly sure what happened here. We're getting information that seems to contradict the original report about whether this was an assassination attempt or not. Was it? Was it not? This is the information we know and some complicating factors. So President Trump was out in California speaking in Coachella Valley, and the Riverside sheriff made an announcement that he had made an arrest of a man who had firearms in his car, perhaps illegal firearms. I don't know. I assume that firearms would have been illegal if the car was anywhere near the rally site, given the previous assassination attempts against Donald Trump. California is also a state where you're basically not allowed to have firearms anywhere. So the original report was that this guy had illegal firearms, but I'm at a point here today when I'm questioning just about every report that I've heard about this so-called assassination attempt. But anyway, the original report was that a man with illegal firearms and a whole bunch of passports with different names from different countries had stated that he wanted to kill President Trump. The Riverside sheriff said that he was pretty sure that he had stopped a potential 3rd assassination attempt against Trump. But then, after we got this original report, the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself didn't say anything about this. And I thought, that's odd. Maybe there's more to this story than we realize. Then we started getting reports, mostly through citizen journalism on X, that this story was not what it seemed. We got some conflicting information that actually there weren't dozens of passports, and this guy didn't state that he had intent to kill President Trump. And then I want to read you this thread that was posted on Twitter by the guy who was arrested. The guy's name is Vem Miller, and this is what his former business partner posted. She said, the man they just arrested for supposedly trying to kill Trump in Coachella is my good friend and business partner for America Happens, Vem Miller. Vem had just exposed a huge deep state cover-up involving the feds and the Bundy Ranch scandal. So I firmly believe, she says, this is 100% some kind of setup in retribution for exposing it. That, or Trump's security team, is a bunch of dipshits trying to make up for how badly they failed in Pennsylvania with any kind of win they can get, fake or not. There isn't a universe that Vem's intention was to kill Trump. He's worked too hard in this movement to expose the deep state and all the people against him. If he had guns in his car that were illegal, whoopee effing do. As a pro 2A advocate, ask me if I give a shit about a good guy with a gun in an unsafe S-hole like California. It doesn't even make sense why his passes would be fake either when they're both usually invited as media to these things, et cetera, et cetera. She goes on to say that they did an anti-deep state documentary. So this woman, Mindy Robinson, who I don't know this woman. I don't know anything about this woman. I don't know if this is true, but it is interesting to see that someone is saying that there's more to the story. Then we have a tweet. Let me bring this up here. Hold on one sec. This is from Raheem Kassam, who says, Vem Miller, the man who was arrested with firearms near the Trump rally in Coachella, tells me, quote, there were no fake passports. That's complete nonsense. I have 2 passports. One is US and one is Canadian. I was born in Toronto. That's why I have that, even though I grew up in LA. But since I'm born there, I was able to get a passport, which has been helpful because, you know, sometimes you can travel Canadian passport to certain places. It's better than US passport, especially since I was very early on an early 2000s filming in war zones, end quote. Okay, so now I think this situation, which was weird to begin with, has gotten a little more complicated. I don't know if we know what to think of this. I think there are a couple of options about what happened here. Option number 1 is there was a legitimate assassination attempt against Trump and the Riverside sheriff stopped it. Option number 2 is this guy was found, Vem Miller, maybe had illegal firearms in his vehicle and he had them there illegally, but he didn't intend to kill Trump and the law enforcement jumped to that conclusion. Option number 3 is that he was being targeted by the deep state. I don't even know what option number 4 would be, that the law enforcement around Trump were so incompetent that they almost let a guy through and then didn't. I don't know. It seems to me that the most likely scenario here is that this guy had firearms and didn't intend to use them against Trump, that he was just carrying firearms in California, basically under the table, and that when law enforcement arrested him for that, they assumed that he intended to kill Trump. I don't know that for a fact. That's just based on this sort of collection of evidence we have. That's what it's looking like at this time. But we don't know yet. What we do know for a fact is that the assassination attempts against Trump are going to beget more assassination attempts for a couple of reasons. First of all, the U.S. Secret Service's failure in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, 2024, when Donald Trump was shot in the ear by a would-be assassin who only missed killing the president, which was his intent, because President Trump happened to turn his head to look at that Border Patrol chart. The U.S. Secret Service failure destroyed their illusion of competence. And their illusion of competence was the deterrent effect for would-be assassins. It's not because the Secret Service is going to be ever perfect at preventing violence against political figures. It's that the illusion of protection served as a deterrent for anybody to try. Well, that has been destroyed. So there are going to be copycats of every type of motivation, whether it's a crazy person, whether it's a radical leftist ideologue, whether it's a foreign adversary, whether it's a fame seeker, a notoriety seeker. There's going to be other assassination attempts against Trump because of the Secret Service's failure the first time. The second thing is Kamala Harris and the mainstream media. The reason the first assassination attempt happened was because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the mainstream media lie about Trump. Vicious, evil lies, calling Trump Hitler, a dictator, an authoritarian, a threat to democracy, evil, a racist, accusing him of wanting to end our country and engage in a genocide against marginalized people. And that kind of lie puts fear in people. So much fear that it rises to existential fear. And crazy people think that based on that existential fear that's been put in their minds and in their hearts by Kamala and the mainstream media lying, think their only course of action to prevent this is to kill Trump. Well, that didn't just happen before July 13th. That has continued to happen to this day. And so right now we are this close to the left losing all of their lawfare cases against Trump. So much, so close to losing that they've almost moved on. They're going to hang on till the very end, but they've almost moved on. They need Donald Trump to be taken out one way or the other. So we are going to see this happen again and again. Whether or not that's what happened in Coachella, that remains to be seen. But the evidence is pointing to perhaps incompetence and lower level lawbreaking than an assassination attempt, at least at this point. Meanwhile, President Trump is requesting military style protection for the remainder of the campaign, the same type of protection that a sitting president of the United States would get. He should obviously be granted this protection. This is Joe Biden's decision as commander-in-chief to give this to Trump or not. Trump certainly deserves it. He's been the target of an attempted assassination twice, and that doesn't even take into consideration the assassination teams that Iran has reportedly deployed against him to try to take him out as revenge for killing Soleimani. This would be an advantage for Trump. And by the way, if when I say this would be an advantage for Trump, that's even a cynical way to look at it. What I mean by that is if Joe Biden denies this to Trump, it's because Joe Biden views this as an advantage to Trump. It would remind everyone every time Trump was on TV that he's been the target of an attempted assassination, and reminding people that make people more likely to vote for Trump because they know that trying to assassinate a politician because you don't like his political views is evil and something that the left has essentially been shrugging their shoulders about since the 2 times that it's happened in the last 3 months. So giving this military protection, this military style protection to Donald Trump could serve him an advantage in the eyes of Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden refuses to provide this to Trump, you know that that's the way that he views things and that he doesn't care if Donald Trump is killed as long as Kamala Harris wins the election. Watch out for that in the days to come, whether or not Joe Biden approves that. In all the time that we have been alive, the US dollar has always been the primary currency. But that may not be the case much longer if the elites have their way. The US dollar is facing unprecedented inflation. I don't need to tell you this. You know how much your groceries cost this week, how much it costs you to fill up your gas tank. Our politics is getting increasingly unstable, and I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. We're a couple of weeks out from the election, and that doesn't even take into account the transition period, which was the part of the transition period that was the rough part the last time. You remember. And as if this isn't scary enough, the government is looking to take control of our money with a new digital dollar. The UN just codified this. We talked about that on the show 2 weeks ago. This is why it's never been more important to take control over our own wealth. Don't let your life savings become a casualty of failing banks or currency wars. Now is the time to call the only precious metal dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings, your retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. I just heard my husband on the phone the other day doing this, converting our money into physical gold and silver. American Hartford Gold is the company to use because they support content like this that's committed to bringing you the truth. Tell them I sent you. They'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first order. Call them now. You can click the link in the description of this episode, or you can call 866-996-5172. That's 866-996-5172, or text Liz to 998899. Again, that's 866-996-5172, or text Liz to 998899. With me now, she's a New York Times best-selling author, much to the New York Times chagrin, I assume. Her book, Shepherds for Sale, is a must-read. She's also a culture reporter at the Daily Wire, Megan Basham. Megan, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So I want to ask you about this tweet from Charlie Kirk from last week. We mentioned it on the show on Friday, I believe, but it is worth digging into a little more deeply. This is what he tweeted. He said, according to a new survey by George Barna, only 51% of people of faith plan to vote this November. Charlie says, translation, 41 million born-again Christians will not vote. 32 million mainline Christians will not vote. And then Charlie says this is a 5-alarm fire. I, of course, agree with that. I think you agree with that. That's pretty... We can maybe it isn't so obvious, obviously, if there's 73 million Christians that aren't voting. But let's start with the why here. Why are we seeing so many Christians sit out this election cycle?
Right. And there's a really important data point in that Barna research, and it's that it's not just Christians that are sitting out. It is regular churchgoers. So it's not just the people who, culturally identify as Christians. Maybe they're not super committed to the voting process. It's actually really alarming that it's roughly 30 million who are the people who are at church every week and who typically are very committed to the political process. And Barna said in his research that he found that their voter enthusiasm is way down since 2020. So that is something that we really do need to talk about and notice. This isn't same old, same old. And a big part of why that's happening, I think, one, obviously, we have to acknowledge the abortion issue. I think the Republican Party's conflicting messaging on that this cycle has depressed enthusiasm a little bit. But there's also something else that I think is more significant going on. And that is the fact that a lot of this voter suppression, lack of enthusiasm, has been deliberately orchestrated by hard left secular foundations and billionaires. And they have been working for the last few years to try to convince Christians, hey, you don't need to vote. It's not important that you play a part of the political process. In fact, it could be political idolatry. So maybe it would be better if you find ways to accommodate the left's policies in the name of pluralism. And I can give you one really stark example that's going on right now. It's a quote unquote Bible study curriculum that is called the After Party, that was created by the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, David French, and a Democrat Party Duke Divinity professor. So not a wide range of Christian political opinion there. All three never Trumpers, two of whom are supporting Kamala Harris openly. So they created this supposed political Bible study curriculum to go into conservative churches, conservative college campuses. There was an effort to get it on 185 conservative college campuses. And it teaches Christians that politics are really complex. It's not always clear who you should vote for. And what we really need to do is turn down the rhetoric. And in fact, we don't know how we should vote except on the issue of alleged racial injustice. There, they say it's very clear that Christians have a mandate to vote to stem the tide of what they claim is injustice in our policing system and other racial injustices. So it makes it pretty clear when you read the curriculum who they want you to vote for. And that curriculum exclusively funded by hard left secular foundations, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and the Hewlett Foundation, which also back Planned Parenthood, transgender initiatives for youth, and things of that nature. So these are not Christians, and they are funding these kind of operations in order to, I would say, really suppress that Christian vote.
So this is interesting because there's a difference between David French maybe being a naive patsy, right? Who's just like, I don't know who to vote for because I want to be an absolutist. There are some people like that, and I'm making fun of David French, but not other people who are unsure, because all political candidates are flawed. They all have moral issues. That's true. I would never deny that. And I do think that we, as Christians, need to make sure that we don't get into any kind of political idolatry. All of that is true. But you're saying that this is a deliberate effort to actually a deliberate effort by rich leftists, those who fund the Democratic agenda, to suppress
non-Christian leftists. Yeah.
Oh, rich, probably anti-Christian leftists, not just not Christian, to suppress the Christian vote. And the tactic they're using isn't inviting people to be leftists. It's just trying to make them feel guilty, use their consciences against them, confuse them so that they don't vote for Trump.
That is exactly right. That's exactly what's happening. And I can tell you that David French kind of gave the game away because this had all been packaged. And this is just one example, by the way. I don't want to give the impression that this is, the totality of what I'm talking about here. I detail a lot of these things in my book, just one example. But David French kind of gave the game away because initially they packaged it as, hey, we're just trying to help Christians have more grace-filled conversations around politics. But then he went on a podcast with Phil Vischer, who, if you're not familiar with him,
VeggieTales.
VeggieTales, that's right. He's the creator of VeggieTales. And he told Phil Vischer, this is about taking on MAGA. So he really, I think, in a moment of transparency, revealed what this is really about. And look, that's just one example. I could tell you the Fetzer Institute, another left-wing foundation, has been giving money to the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which is the lobbying arm of the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S., the Southern Baptist Convention, arguably the most conservative Protestant denomination in the U.S., also funding research into how evangelicals engage political rhetoric and distributing materials in order to convince them that they need to embrace the cause of pluralism. And when you hear that term pluralism, what they mean is Christians need to find ways to accommodate leftism in the public square. They need to not be so convictional in advocating for their policies when it comes to the political process, because that's what politics is. It's advocating for your beliefs and your values. And if you're not doing that, then according to these institutes and these foundations, you are letting down the cause of pluralism. And so, these are just a couple of examples. There's also the Democracy Fund, which is funded by the eBay founder, Pierre Omidyar, far left, a Buddhist, not a Christian. He's also been donating to Christian organizations that are ostensibly conservative on the subject of political participation. So I always want to be clear. They're not donating to, get lunches to school children or hand out Bibles or something. They're donating specifically on this subject of how Christians discuss politics.
And by the way, this institute that you mentioned, the Fetzer Institute, a lot of people watching and listening to the show are going to recognize that name because we talked about the Fetzer Institute in my book. This is the institute that is essentially mainstreamed social emotional learning, which is just a euphemism for critical theory, which is communism. It's Marxism. So it always leads back to the same stuff, doesn't it? It always leads back to this idea that we are not just left versus right in this country. It's not just political divisions. We are in a battle of good versus evil. And, this idea of pluralism, you can talk about this too, but I actually don't believe in the concept of neutrality in our nation. I don't think we're ever going to have this public life that is absent of anybody's morals or religious beliefs. It's either going to be our values, which prevail in the public sphere, that includes in public spaces, or it's going to be theirs. And when I say theirs, I mean anti-Christian values. It's either going to be good or it's going to be evil. And so we as Christians can't just say, well, we don't want to push our morals on other people. We don't want to be Bible thumpers. Listen, no one's forcing anybody to go to church. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a theocracy. But if we don't acknowledge objective truth, if we don't acknowledge natural law, if we don't acknowledge that our nation was built, yes, on Christian biblical principles, then it's not just going to sort of fail. The other side, which has embraced communism, which is a satanic ideology, that's going to prevail.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's so much a part of this, what I would call this category error campaign has been about, because you will hear them use slogans like, and this was very popular with Tim Keller, who recently passed away last year, and he's well known for founding the Gospel Coalition, which is still very influential among conservative Christians and churches. And he would say things like, the gospel is neither left nor right, which, yes, that's true, but it implies that there is a moral parallel between the left and the right, and there absolutely isn't. And it also implies that the purpose of the gospel is the same purpose as politics. And no, these are two different things. The gospel is spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. Politics is how we order our political life. It's how we order our nation. It's how we will legislate. So these are really two entirely different things that are being conflated for the purpose of pretending like if you as a Christian participate in that process in a distinct way that says, no, we're going to vote for the policies of conservatives and for the family, that you're then becoming a political idolater. And I think we can see just how much damage and destruction has been wrought by Christians abdicating their role in the civic sphere in that way. And, it's so funny when you say this issue about evil in the public square. We are actually supposed to be the salt and light. And when you see us not participating, that preservative effect that we're supposed to have, we're not having then. And one more data point in that Barna research, it said that 36% of churches have not mentioned voting. They haven't taught on the civic duty of voting in their churches. And that is something that actually is biblical. We are the rulers, according to Romans 13 in our society, and we have a role here to do good then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to think about this number, it really comes down to if Kamala Harris wins, then it's Christians and pro-lifers who are mostly Christians. So I am going to conflate the two. I know there are some pro-lifers who aren't, but most are.
Mostly.
It's really Christians who will be to blame for that in a passive way. But some are, action and lack of action are both culpable when you are coming up on Judgment Day. Do you think that most of these Christians, these 41 million born again Christians, 32 million mainline Christians, do you think that they have been essentially wokeified Do you think, because there is this huge strain of wokeness going through Christian churches right now, do you think that they are confused about who to vote for? Because it is absolutely true that Donald Trump's position on abortion, I mean, I'm much more pro-life than Donald Trump.
Right.
His position is disappointing to me. He's still, when you analyze it, he's the lesser of two evils by so non-comparatively that to me the choice is obvious. Of course you want to vote for Donald Trump to preserve the good that exists between his position and Kamala Harris's, even though I wish that he would be more absolutist. But do you think that these are wokeified people, confused people? How would you categorize these people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really two categories. You have some people who are confused and they've been somewhat shamed from thinking that, well, gosh, if I don't have the perfect candidate, then I guess we just have to sit out because someone doesn't represent our ideals in a perfect way. But then on the other hand, you do have some of these, and again, I just want to emphasize, these are not fringe or even recognized progressives who are doing this, but you have some of these evangelical Christian leaders who are actually arguing that we should vote for the not the lesser of two evils, but the greater of the two evils. So you have someone like the chairman of the board of Christianity Today is part of Evangelicals for Harris. You have a council member of the Gospel Coalition. He may be emeritus now, but Ray Ortland, who is well-known pastor, well-known speaker, well-known author. He has also advocated for voting for Harris. So I think that's something that is very new in the Christian and evangelical circles. And I think it's startling to see that we now have some of our leaders not just saying, gosh, we really need to not idolize. We need to maybe just sit out to protest, but they're actually saying, no, let's vote for evil.
I think that's an important distinction to make too, because there are some Christians who are busy raising their families, busy going to churches, and may not understand the implications of ordering our political life. They think of it as just arguments in the United States Congress. They're not thinking, oh, the way that we order political society allows us to raise families, allows us to have our parental rights acknowledged and protected by the government, allows us to go to church and worship the God that we want in the way that we choose. They're busy. They're busy.
Right.
They're not wokeified. They're just busy. But that political order is closely tied to, I mean, it's why our country was founded, freedom of religion, so that we could worship the God that we want in the way that we choose. Do you think that some of these people that you mentioned, are they being directly paid? I mean, you mentioned the Gospel Coalition, you mentioned Phil Vischer, you mentioned the editor of Christianity Today. Are they being paid directly by the big Democrat anti-Christian elitists?
Well, I mean, some of what I detail in the book is that their organizations are certainly being directly paid. So I can tell you that this after party curriculum that David French, Russell Moore, and the guy named Curtis Chang are running, they're taking money exclusively from Rockefeller and Hewlett. I can tell you that the ERLC has taken money from the Fetzer Institute. I can tell you that Trinity Forum, which is an organization that was founded by theologian Os Guinness, beloved, but after he left, it has started to go left. And they are taking money from the Democracy Fund. So yes, I mean, I don't know what they are personally taking home, but I can tell you that their organizations are certainly taking money from the left. And to those, Christian voters who are confused, I feel like, and busy, I just want to tell them, Proverbs tells us that a righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And we need to be thinking about the inheritance that we were left, the good inheritance of this nation and our system of self-government, and whether we're planning to leave that inheritance to our children and what obligations we have on that front.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, the one of the things that I've been talking about recently is this weighing of the lesser of two evils. And I think in an ideal world, none of us want to be in that situation.
Right.
We want to like our political candidates. We want to feel that they're champions. We want to feel that they're role models and good people. And I'm not sure that's actually ever been the case in the history of our nation. I say that kind of laughingly.
Maybe George Washington, yeah.
Maybe George Washington.
Yeah.
But very few of them were. I mean, even most of our founding fathers, these brilliant, inspired men, were very flawed. A lot of them had disordered sexual lives. Many of them were slave owners. Really immoral behavior on their part, and it didn't take away from the good that they were able to build in this nation and hand down to us. And we hope for their personal redemption. We hope that they repented of those sins. I have no idea if they did. I'm not God. I don't know. You don't know either. But I've been making this argument that we do have a responsibility to weigh the lesser of two evils, and that it shouldn't be such an emotional process to us, that is somewhat of an idolization of politics if we have this personal revulsion towards a candidate based on their sin. Well, that should actually be humbling, because our sin's like that to God all the time, right? So what we should do
Right.
is take an emotional step back and say, listen, it's our responsibility to protect the dignity of all human life. Which candidate does this better? Now, you're never going to find a candidate that does it absolutely, and it's your responsibility to preserve that good that exists between the two when the one is the lesser of two evils. I've gotten some pushback, though, from Christians on that view, and I'm interested in your take on it.
Well, a couple of things. One, I would say that these personalities really do come and go, and they are all sinful. They are all fallen because that's all you're going to get in this world. So, some may be actual Christians that we put in office, and we want that and we desire that, but we're not always going to get that. And so we have to take the best option that we can get, because the purpose of government is to ensure as much righteousness as possible in the public square. And so we have to do our part to ensure that that's what's happening. It is to restrain evil. And if it's not restraining evil in a system of self-government, then we have to ask how much of that is on us. So one, I would say that, those personalities, they'll be gone shortly, but those policies could have generational impact. And I heard a pastor say this recently, and I thought this was a good way to put it, was that he pointed out a vote is not a Valentine. This does not mean that you are in their fan club. It is selecting a set of policies, and that's really important when we look at how we govern ourselves. And even more specifically, I had a different pastor friend, and I thought this was such a good analogy. What he said was, when it comes to the issue of life, Christians, pro-lifers, have been asking for an apple pie from the GOP. They would like Trump to deliver them a baked apple pie. But Trump isn't going to give them an apple pie, because that's not who Trump is. That's not his personal conviction, and that's disappointing. But what he has done is made a way that we can have flour, apples, sugar, and our job now is to go out into the states and figure out, okay, how do we make apple pie in all these states? And I understand that that's a messy, hard process, but the way has been made, and we need to protect that way, because you have another presidential ticket on the other side who is promising that they're going to take that away and nobody's having any apple pies. So I liked that analogy. I think it's a simple way to look at it, that what we're really doing is preserving the avenues so that we can continue to rack up some pro-life wins. And that really, at this point, is bigger than Trump, and it will go far beyond Trump.
Yeah, and you have a candidate in Kamala Harris who champions and smiles about abortion up until the moment of birth. Big, healthy babies, 7,
Right.
8, and 9 months inside the mother's womb, being ripped apart for no reason other than convenience, who has a running mate who signed a law that allows doctors to deny medical care to babies born alive after botched abortions. It doesn't get more evil than that. It simply does not. And that doesn't even take into account issues of inflation so that you can support your family, issues of religious liberty so that you can worship God, issues of keeping our nation safe and getting us out of forever wars so our children don't die to line the pockets of warmongers. That doesn't take into account transing innocent children, mutilating their bodies in the name of a communist ideology, filling their minds with critical race theory, telling them they're evil because of the color of their skin or oppressed based on the color of their skin, the crime and safety in our cities, an open border that is not about welcoming the sojourner, but is about criminals, cartels, gang members coming in, ravishing our city, overwhelming our welfare system as a deliberate plot for the Democrats to destroy our system of government and impose their tyranny. These are all things that it should be very easy for Christians to see that Donald Trump is the superior candidate, regardless of whether he is as pro-life as we are or not, which, again, I wish he would be.
Yeah, and I think that we're all feeling that way about the GOP generally, because that was the platform that came down. But let's also remember that this isn't just an election in which Donald Trump is going to be on the ballot. There's going to be senators, congressmen, down ballot issues. We can look at the abortion amendment that is up for the vote in Florida. It's appalling. It will completely leave basically every unborn, preborn life at the mercy of a mother's whims. And those are things also that Christians need to get out and vote for. And so I don't think that you can justifiably say, well, I don't like Donald Trump, or I find him morally objectionable, so I'm not going to vote. I cannot bind people's consciences on that issue, but I would certainly tell them he is not the only person on the ballot. So even if you feel like you can't vote for him, you can't abstain here on some of these other moral issues. I think we have a stewardship duty to get out and make our voices heard as Christians, and to be that salt and light in the public square. Now, I think you should vote for president, but if you really feel that you can't because of your, spirit-led conscience issues, then I can't tell you to violate that. But I think certainly a lot of prayerful soul searching ought to be happening. among churches as to just how much guidance they're offering and how much truly biblical teaching they're offering. Because one of the things that Barna said was that they're just avoiding the election, that you have just a huge amount of churches who are saying, we don't quite know how to talk about it. So we as pastors are going to abdicate our responsibility and just not talk about it.
Yeah, and I think I would take it one step further than you. I think people do have a responsibility to vote in the presidential election. And I think as Christians, we have a moral responsibility to vote for the lesser of two evils, to preserve the good that exists between that lesser and the greater of the two evils. Policy-wise, personalities aside, I don't care about anybody's personality here. Also, guys, everybody watching, you should check with your churches. You should check with the organizations that your churches work with and see where they're getting money from. Because if your church or a Bible study that your church is partaking in, or the leadership or any kind of association with left-wing organizations, you should speak up, because it's going to take us as Christians, as the body of Christ, to get this out of Christian churches so that we don't have Christianity being wokeified. We know what the left's tactic is. It's the infiltrate and overthrow the civil institutions in our country. We've seen this in the media. We've seen this in education. We've seen this in the law. They obviously are coming after the family, but don't forget, religion is also a civil institution, a pillar of our country, and they are doing their best to subvert us from within, because without religion, without family, without a free press, without the law, without all of these, without the education system, we're going to fall, and it's going to be easy for them to overthrow our government. That's what we're seeing happening. Megan Basham, thank you for all that you do, reporting this, exposing this. Guys, go get her book. It's called Shepherds for Sale. The New York Times put her on the bestseller list, and you know that they hated every minute of it, which is just another reason for you to buy the book. Thanks for being here, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
I've got something really exciting to share. They say no one reads anymore, but I know that's not true of this audience. I think we're all nerds here, right? We all love to read. And thank goodness our best and most important ideas are still captured in print, which is why we at Blaze Media have decided to launch a premium quarterly magazine. It's called Frontier. I have the first copy right here with me. It's so beautiful. I mean, you got to feel this thing. You know, it's a work of art. Frontier is packed with thoughtful commentary, stunning photography, and original journalism that highlights the people who refuse to back down. Just in this issue alone, this first issue, there's Chris Rufo, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck. And it's not just a magazine. We are planting a flag in the ground. I think you're going to love it. Frontier is just the beginning. As part of our new Blaze Unlimited membership, you will get exclusive access to Frontier delivered right to your door, along with a whole lot more. Blaze Unlimited is about taking another step forward, fighting back against state-run media, propaganda, the forces trying to tear down the foundations of this country. As a founding member of Blaze Unlimited, you will receive a limited edition founding members card, even more behind-the-scenes content, VIP event access, and here's the big one, the chance to have your voice heard. We want you to help shape the future of Blaze Media, to push back against the mainstream machine that's doing everything it can to silence truth. This membership is about more than just sitting on the sidelines. It's about actively joining the mission to defend free speech and uphold the American way of life. If you're ready to take the next step in this fight, go to blazeunlimited.com/Liz to claim your spot. Don't wait. Founding member spots are limited because we know this isn't going to be for everyone. But if it's for you, let's stand together, push back, and keep the spirit of America alive. Join Blaze Unlimited today. Go to blazeunlimited.com/Liz. And now it is time for our headlines. I hope you saw this video over the weekend. I don't think I've ever laughed so hard. Kamala Harris's team is out with a new ad called I'm a Man. Take a look at it.
I'm a man.
I'm a man.
I'm a man, man.
And I'm man enough. I'm man enough to enjoy a barrel-proof bourbon.
Neat.
Man enough to cook my steak rare.
Man enough to deadlift 500, then braid the out of my daughter's hair.
You think I'm afraid to rebuild a carburetor? I eat carburetors for breakfast.
I ain't afraid of bears.
That's what bear hugs are for.
I'll tell you another thing I sure as shit am not afraid of. Women. I'm not afraid of women.
I'm not afraid of women.
They want to control their bodies? I say go for it.
They want to use IVF to start a family? I'm not afraid of families.
They want to be childless cat ladies?
Have all the cats you want.
Woman wants to be president?
Well, I hope she has the guts to look me right in the eye and accept my full-throated endorsement.
Because I'm man enough to support women.
Man enough to know what kind of donuts I like.
Man enough to admit I'm lost, even when I refuse to ask for directions.
Man enough to not ban young women from reading Little Women.
Or one of those pants books that the sisters like.
I'm man enough to raw dog a flight. It sucked. Not worth it. I'm man enough to be emotional in front of my wife.
In front of my kids.
In front of my horse. I'm man enough to tell you that I cry at Love Actually. Good Will Hunting.
West Side Story.
That and predator.
And I'm sick of so-called men domineering, belittling, and controlling women just so they can feel more powerful.
That's not how my mama raised me.
I love women.
I love women who support their families.
Women who decide not to have families.
Women who take charge.
And I'm man enough to help them win.
Watch out, men. This is who the left wants you to be. The left's definition of a man is essentially strip away all masculinity and become a woman, and then you'll be a man. By the way, this ad was put out by Kamala Harris, who is married to Doug Emhoff, who is credibly accused of beating his ex-girlfriend, and not just credibly accused, impregnated his daughter's elementary school teacher, who was also his nanny, and who, by the way, also lectured us about what toxic masculinity is. As usual, male feminists are just hiding their actual toxic, abusive qualities and pretending to be pro-women. Listen, a couple of things. First of all, many of you pointed out online that these men in this video don't exactly look like manly men to you, if you know what I mean. Someone did a background into these actors that were in this video because these are not manly men who vote for Kamala. We have a far-left comedian who is single, so pro-family, wife, actually single. We have a bisexual who's done gay for pay movies. We have another gay man. We have, who is this one? The bearded grandpa guy is an actor who is unmarried. So these people who say that they are so pro-woman and pro-family are gay and unmarried. There you go. Here's the thing. This is a thought that I had before, not just making fun of this ad, which clearly we should all mock because this is what Kamala Harris wants you to be. Actually, the left has a problem because when they try to turn men into women and tell men that true masculinity is stripping away real masculinity and becoming a woman, this is the problem with secularism, right? That gentleness and self-control are fruits of the Holy Spirit, and men and women are supposed to strive towards that. But when you remove Christ from your life or from your culture, you're removing the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And we as human beings, we are always going to strive for something. It's part of our nature. We can't just, oh, you're not a Christian, you don't strive to be a better person. Everyone strives to be a better person. It's just when you remove objective good, what's true and good and beautiful, the Holy Spirit, when you remove God from the equation, you have to replace it with something, and you end up replacing it with idols. If it's not God, it's something that's trying to copy God or replace God, an idol. And so actually what these feminists are doing is saying, strip away masculinity, become more like me, become more like a woman versus God. So they're idolizing themselves, and they're trying to make men idolize themselves. It's disgusting. You should totally reject it. And then, of course, we have Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. You probably saw this video. She engaged in a TikTok trend with a leftist podcaster that was an absolute gross degradation and mockery of the Eucharist. Take a look at this.
Love you, all I do. Need you, no matter what I do.
Listen, that video should be reason enough for every Christian to vote for Donald Trump and no Christian to vote for Kamala Harris. This is what the left thinks of you. They mock you and revile you just because you're Christian. They don't want tolerance and acceptance because they're not. They want you to be excluded from public life. They want your views to be ridiculed and reviled. It's absolutely disgusting. By the way, Gretchen Whitmer later apologized for this. She apologized because we misinterpreted it. Their classic Democrat apology, not I did something wrong, I apologize. She apologized because of how it was construed, how we interpreted it. But listen, I posted this video and called out Gretchen Whitmer on X and on Instagram. The video went viral, so I'd like to think I had something to do with the pressure that Gretchen Whitmer felt required her to apologize and back off of this behavior. And the point of me bringing this up is not even to pat myself on the back. It's to remind us as Christians, as conservatives, that our voices make a difference. When we lift our voice and we hold politicians accountable, even politicians that hate us, it works. It makes a difference. So when a politician does something bad, hold them accountable. Your voice is leverage enough. J.D. Vance was asked on an interview with the New York Times if Donald Trump won in 2020. And this interviewer is probably the single most shrewish interviewer in her style of questioning that I've ever seen. And this is how J.D. handled it. Take a look at this.
Okay. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Let me ask you a question. Is it okay that big technology companies censored the Hunter Biden laptop story, which independent analysis have said cost Donald Trump millions of votes.
Senator Vance, I'm going to ask you again. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Did big technology companies censor a story that independent studies have suggested would have cost Trump millions of votes?
Senator
I think that's the
Vance,
question.
I'm going to ask you again. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020
And I've answered
election?
your question with another question. You answer my question and I'll answer yours. You're repeating a slogan rather than engaging with what I'm saying, which is that when our own technology firms engage in industrial scale censorship, by the way, backed up by the federal government, in a way that independent studies suggest affect the votes, I'm worried about Americans who feel like there were problems in 2020. I'm not worried about this slogan that people throw. Well, every court case went this way. I'm talking about something very discrete, a problem of censorship in this country that I do think affected things in 2020, and more importantly, that led to Kamala Harris's governance, which has screwed this country up in a big way.
Senator, would you have certified the election in 2020? Yes or no?
I've said that I would have voted against certification because of the concern that I just raised. I think that when you have technology companies—
The answer is no.
When you have technology companies censoring Americans at a mass scale in a way that, again, independent studies have suggested affect the vote, I think that it's right to protest against that, to criticize that, and that's a totally reasonable thing.
First of all, great answer from JD Vance. But here's how conservatives in the future should handle these types of questions, because a lot of conservatives, and this is, I suppose, particular to Republican politicians, but there's conservatives too that aren't in public office who also struggle to answer this question. Don't shy away from addressing this issue. Don't worry that this is going to be a turnoff to independence or make you appear as a crackpot or a conspiracy theory. This is how you handle answering that question. First, you ask the person asking you that question, well, did Donald Trump win in 2020? You say, define the word win. Was the election fair? Was the election free? Were rules changed illegally that impacted how people voted? Was information critical to people's votes censored by big tech at the behest of government agencies? Were votes ultimately counted that shouldn't have been, even if they weren't illegally cast, were they illegally counted? Was there, because of these rules changes before the election, incredible vulnerability to fraud? The answer to all of those questions is the election was not fair. It was not free because rules were changed illegally by people who had no authority to change those rules, especially at the state and local levels. Meanwhile, information critical to people casting their vote was censored by big tech at the behest of big government. So the result of this was votes were counted that shouldn't have been, not because they were cast illegally. It wasn't someone casting a ballot under somebody else's names, but a vote was, say, dropped in a drop box that was not legally placed according to state law. So that vote was invalidly counted, even if it wasn't invalidly cast. This caused immense vulnerability to fraud. And so, yeah, the American people feel skeptical about the integrity of their votes. And conservatives shouldn't shy away from saying this. They should say, don't you care that so many Americans feel this lack of confidence in the integrity of our votes? Don't you care that it's a critical part of our election system for us to feel integrity, feel confidence in our voting system? The other side doesn't have answers to these questions besides what this New York Times journalist trotted out. And each of these questions that I asked, was it fair? Were rules changed illegally? Was information critical to voting censored? Were votes counted that shouldn't have been? Was there incredible vulnerability to fraud? The answer to all these questions is provable and demonstrable. And the left doesn't want to engage in that, so they try to portray you as a crackpot. And it's led to a lot of conservatives, even Republicans in public office or running for public office, fearing engaging in talking about election integrity. And we shouldn't, because it's not only real, it's probably going to happen again if we don't start talking about it, start using our voices to make sure that we understand exactly how the left did this in 2020 so that we don't allow them to do it in 2024. Guys, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter. Go to LizWheelerNewsletter.com. Drop your email address so that I can send you every day. We have content for you. Monday, it's a show. Tuesday, it's a newsletter. Wednesday, it's a show. Thursday, it's a newsletter. Friday, it's a show. Saturday, it's a newsletter. We're always going to keep you up to date on everything that is happening in this country, especially in these critical weeks leading up to the election. So go to LizWheelerNewsletter.com. Sign up. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.